we practice hard, we take it, we be optimistic, and we gonna win games, bro.
All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Douglas Show. Craig Hoffman is with me today. Kind of an unusual, something new we're doing here. You can stream this live on the Big Douglas Show website, on the YouTube channel. Craig, you got this also running up live on the Team 980 YouTube.
Actually, it's on my page. So we're going
page.
at Craig Hoffman. We're going to the Hoffman Show page. But yeah, I appreciate you letting it cross. Hopefully, for folks that are watching that are subscribers of mine, if you're not familiar with the Big Douglas Show, you're welcome. Go subscribe over there. And if you're one of obviously Big Doug's fans, we'd love to have you over consuming what we do on the radio show and the podcast and everything that I do.
That's right. And we're on X right now too, streaming live. So plenty of places to figure this all out. Craig, it sucks there's nothing to talk about these days.
I know. God, it was funny. We were talking about that for the radio show. We kind of left the Thursday rundown blank with a big prayer emoji of just like, please, will they hire a coach? Because they can't do another day of speculation. And here we are.
You think, let's start here. Dan Quinn is the man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not I'm not upset about this. Some people are, and that's okay. They have the right to feel any way you want to. Let's start here. How do you like? Okay, let me regroup. You think this was not their first choice, and that's okay. I believe that. Maybe you don't believe that. I still think McDonald would have been their first choice. He didn't want the job, and that's okay. Dan Quinn, to me, is not a Ron Rivera retread either, though. I think that needs to be. I know people will say we can look at the record and we can look at the style. The styles aren't the same. Records are kind of interesting on how they pay it out. Let's get your original thoughts with Dan Quinn and maybe reaction to some of the things I've said here.
Yeah, so I'll start with the number one candidate thing. I think he was close to being their number one, and really I think they had a tier one of candidates after the interviews, right? I think they probably did go into like basically the whole NFL did. They went into the process thinking Ben Johnson was the number one candidate, would be my guess. I don't have information, as I say often on my show. Occasionally I'll get a nugget here or there, but I'm not a reporter anymore. I do opinion journalism. So I try to be factual and I try to talk to people who know stuff. But this is ultimately like me putting pieces together, not me speaking with any reporting. But the consensus in the league was Ben Johnson, with what he's done in Detroit, is the number one guy, right? He gets into the interview process. They do that first round of Zoom interviews. And all of a sudden there's, the John Kimes of the world and Adam Schefter, two of the most plugged in guys that there are, especially when it comes to this team, going like, I don't know that it's Ben Johnson. Everybody needs to stop connecting those dots. And Mike Garafolo, I actually just saw, was on a radio show, I think it was in Seattle, and said like, yeah, Johnson didn't interview particularly well. And so all of a sudden he goes from maybe the top of tier one with a group that includes Dan Quinn, by the way, who interviewed very well and who before that Packers game, nobody would have had any qualms about league wide. And all of a sudden it's a much more even tier one. And I think McDonald was in there too. Did they maybe want McDonald over Quinn if they had, their pick? Maybe, but I think they had questions, and they were different questions, but questions about both. And they are very happy with Dan Quinn as their choice. And it kind of fits what Josh Harris does, right? Like Josh Harris's hires in Philadelphia with the Sixers, Doug, you and I have talked about. I'm a big NBA guy. All due respect to the hockey fans watching, like I don't know a lot about what he's done with the Devils, but Brett Brown, longtime Greg Popovich assistant. It was his first job, but long time assistant, one of the best programs. Doc Rivers, Nick Nurse, accomplished veteran coaches. Like, this is who he likes to go after. I think that had there been a young hotshot, the next Kyle Shanahan that they felt really good about, great. If not, this seems really plausible. But I think the most important thing is, and why this is, and we can get more into like who Quinn is as a personality versus Rivera, but the biggest difference is structural. They hired him to be a football coach. They didn't hire him to be a manager. They didn't hire him to do all this other stuff, to be a PR spokesperson. Dan Quinn is a good football coach who's going to get to coach football, and that's great. That was going to help any candidate they hired, and certainly a guy as good at coaching football as Dan Quinn.
It's easy to see the defensive players on this team already excited about what the bump means just for them. We were talking on the show the other day about, You start looking at this roster, Craig, compared to rosters around the league, and I think it separates the conversations, right? So there's a reason that GMs like jobs, 10 picks in the first 100, so the number 2 overall pick, tons of cap space. That doesn't necessarily do anything for the head coach, right? Unless they're aligned, as they've been saying. That's the new buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
We'll trade out a position flex for
I like aligned so much better.
Yes,
Give
we're
me
aligned so much better, Craig. But I do think, that was important when we look at these head coaching searches, is that for an actual head coach, if this was your first go round, let's say you're McDonald, right?
Right.
How many of these guys are in a position where they can start out 3 and something for a couple of years?
Right.
For your first go around. So I wonder from the head coaching standpoint, if that wasn't important to some of these other guys. Craig, there is a rumor running around. I don't know if you have heard it. We won't spend a ton of time on it if you haven't. The Mrs. McDonald being a cheerleader thing, does that have legs? I mean, she was here in 2020, so
not.
It's not impossible to say it wasn't. Can we put that to bed?
Yeah, that feels very silly to me. That's
Hattie.
Yeah, I just don't think that that's something that would ultimately affect them at this point. I mean, there's no one left from that. And I won't say no one, but there's almost no one left from that regime. So, her experiences here, or what she may know about, where the bodies are buried. Like, the guy who killed the bodies that needed to be buried is somewhere in a yacht off of Europe.
I tend to agree, but it was out there. I thought maybe you'd heard on it. Figured we'd ask real fast. No. So moving.
I haven't heard a thing about it. Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. Anthony Weaver was in. I've asked this question. Maybe you have a better feeling for it. Anthony Weaver was interviewing for the job. For those that don't know, he's the defensive line assistant head coach for the Ravens. So here's what I was thinking. How much more important is that assistant head coach title? Is it more valuable than being the coordinator? So like somebody's, with the Ravens, they bumped somebody different to defensive coordinator, right? And so I was thinking to myself, well, if you're the assistant head coach, it's probably better for you to be a position coach so that you can spend more time doing the assistant head coach duties. A la they said Weaver was really important in getting the Tom Monken hire. So I'm curious as they give out those titles, like, is it more important to be the assistant head coach or the coordinator? Do you have a feel for that? I've been asking around, been having a hard time getting an answer.
I think the reason you have a hard time getting an answer is it depends on the place, right? So if your goal is to be a play caller and like that's who you are and that's what you want to be, the coordinator title is the most important thing. I think if that's not your strong suit, but you want to be a head coach one day, then getting that associate or assistant head coach title, whatever version of it you get, is the most important thing. And I think, like, not to stereotype, but like D-line coaches often don't necessarily translate as well to coordinators. Now, Dan Quinn is a phenomenal exception to that. He was a D-line guy who is one of the best coordinators in the last 15 years of the NFL, what he did in Seattle, what he's done in Dallas. And he wasn't really hands-on in Atlanta, and I think that was a mistake. And I'm hoping that he's more hands-on here. But a lot of secondary type of guys tend to be more in that play calling role because you're calling coverages, and that back seven is a thing that they're obviously going to have a little bit more understanding with. So that tends to be same reason that like running backs coaches tend to not wind up being coordinators, where quarterbacks and tight ends coaches often that's the path. Right. It's just like what parts of the game and how much of the game do you have a mastery of? And I think with that, there's different paths to being a head coach. So I think for Weaver, as someone who has great administrative skills, strong leader, et cetera, that's a great spot for him. And I think when you look at like, okay, well, what do they want to do with Quinn here? Who's going to be his assistant? I think someone with that similar skill set is exactly what you need. Like, I hope that Dan hires someone who has a great administrative, like scheduling, all the head coachy type of stuff, a lot of stuff that frankly we heard Ron pass off to EB this year, like that type of stuff to take it off of his plate so that Dan can focus more on the defense than he did when he was the head coach in Atlanta. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, kind of gets at what you're looking for, but to me it's kind of, there's multiple paths that can lead to back to the same place, and it depends on what your strengths and skill sets are of which one, like which path you would ultimately pursue.
Andy Story here in the chat says supposedly they wanted someone with experience because this is Peter's first job. I think we probably didn't put enough stock into that, probably just because we got pounded for several weeks with everybody that had a microphone saying that it was Peters and Johnson. It was just too easy to go chalk this round, right?
Yeah, and I think especially with how quickly, like, look, I mean, I kind of always was like, well, they haven't even interviewed people yet. People need to relax. But in my head, I was also like, and even at times on the show, I was like, look, everyone says it's Peters. So I asked like draft guys that we had on Take Command or on the radio show, like, so let's say Ben Johnson's the coach. What do you do it to? Like seeing what he does schematically. Because it felt like, I mean, shoot, we're going to have Kevin Burkhardt on the show later today. And Burkhardt and Olsen were talking during the NFC Championship game as like, this is the presumed coach. Like, that's the kind of certainty it felt like. So everyone was hearing the same stuff. And so it wasn't crazy. And I think you're also connecting those dots because of how quickly Peters happened. And it's like, Peters, the guy. Everyone says he's the guy. Cool. They got him in 5 minutes. Now Johnson's the guy. And people just figured they would get him in 5 minutes too. And lo and behold, as he interviews, maybe he's not quite the guy. He certainly didn't think he was the guy, and thus he pulled his name out. And now it looks like it's a scramble. It looks like it's settling. It looks like it's all these things, when in reality, like if he really wasn't that guy, probably dodged a bullet. And yes. I don't say that to diminish Ben Johnson. Like if Ben Johnson has the awareness to go, this ain't for me right now. I'm not ready yet. I'm not mentally in it. Doug, you and I both know, we've been watching sports and been around it long enough. How many dudes would take the money and in 3 years be like, yeah, in 3 years be like, I shouldn't have taken that. Like, or, 3 years they get fired. 5 years from now, they're given an interview and it's like, I probably should have never taken the job. I wasn't ready. And it's like, cool, thanks for wasting our time. Thank Ben Johnson for not wasting your time. Like, I know it feels like he did, but I'd rather him waste 3 weeks of time of speculation and them getting on a plane to go interview him and Aaron Glenn, and turns out they only interviewed Aaron Glenn, than wasting 3 years of him not being ready and trying to find his way as a head coach, especially in a media market like this, that would eat someone up who wasn't up for the job.
Well, and it feels like, and we don't know this, but it feels like Josh Harris is not the guy to come in and act somebody after 1 year, right? Like if Ben Johnson was in here and was a mistake, and you're thinking to yourself, damn it, this was not the way to go. It doesn't feel like that's the group, a la letting Rivera stay, to just come in and whack people right away. So I think you're right. And I think the other thing that we're forgetting in this, like, it's all happening right now. It's all happening right now. So Dan Quinn is what we're looking at. But to me, again, Peters was the more important hire.
Yeah,
right? Like
long-term, I agree.
If the plan works and Peter is the guy, he'll be here, followed Schneider in Seattle for a long time. So I think that is what we need to remember more than anything, is that the roster is lacking. This feels like the closest thing we've been to a true rebuild. Whatever you want to say, Rivera still was kind of doing it on the fly. I hope, and it feels like this won't be an on the fly type of deal.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to what you just said along those lines. So I'm just going to take the next step, which is these two hires are super important. Peters and his relationship with Quinn is going to be massive. What do they have? What do they want in a football team, right? Can they communicate? But then everyone knows, like, the staff is what's next. And those hires are critically important. When we take command this morning, Logan used a great phrase of like, these are the boots on the ground. The next guys in they're not more important than the head coach, because the head coach hires these guys. He's ultimately responsible for them. But
Quinn will have control of the roster? Have we heard that yet?
Well, I think Peters has control of the roster when it comes to
not the roster, but
the staff.
Yeah, that's what. Yes,
but
staff.
I think also, like, one of the things with the alignment hot word, the buzz thing is like, and I think the best example of this was Pete and Schneider in Seattle. And Schneider talked about this like through tears when they let go of Pete. That seemed to be very much an ownership decision up there. But he was like, I will have control of the roster now. Pete technically had it, but he never really used it. Like Pete never was like, I'm overriding you. They worked together. It was really like, Bruce Allen used to always say, these are Washington decisions. And it's like, no, they weren't. Like, you guys were beating the hell out of each other, different people standing on opposite ends of the table all the time. And then you'd finally come to some semblance of a Washington decision, and then the owner would come in on draft day and blow that decision out of the water. Like, you guys are buffoons. I think Peters and Quinn will work together. And so, while yes, Dan will have ultimate say on his staff, it's his job to coach the football team. If he wants to go hire Clint Kubiak from San Francisco and Adam has a great relationship, maybe Adam makes the call. Like, the initial call, like, hey, Clint, Dan wants you to come here. Like, are you interested? I loved your work. I loved working with you. Like, they'll work together. They're on the same team in a literal and figurative sense. So, but that ability to hire is going to be.
Has those relationships too, right? Because that whole,
for sure,
that whole Shanahan tree was in Atlanta for at least a year.
So the next,
great
photo
down to Atlanta, right?
Yeah, the next great photo after the 2013 Washington photo is like the 2016, I want to say, Atlanta Falcons. That staff was Dan Quinn, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniels, Matt LaFleur, Mike LaFleur, who, by the way, is going to be an OC candidate here, Jeff Ulbrich, who's the defensive coordinator for the Jets and is awesome. He was the linebackers coach. Raheem Morris, who's now back in Atlanta as the head coach. Like, that's got tons of dudes on it. Yep. So I definitely think that ability to hire a staff, everyone's like, well, he sucked after Kyle left. And it's like, yeah, you want to know who knows that? Dan Quinn. He's aware. Right. And so he knows how important that staff and the ability to get continuity and getting those hires right. But guess what? If Mike McDonald had gotten this job and hired a great OC and that guy left, or Ben Johnson hired the right people around him and those people got poached, and then all of a sudden he was struggling and underwater, the staff hires would matter just as much as them. Just because we've seen it before with Quinn doesn't mean it's more important than it would have been with any other coach. Look at the best teams in the league. Their staffs are sick. Look at this team the last 4 years. Their staff was terrible. It's a big, big reason why.
That's right. No surprise that nobody from those Ron Rivera staffs were getting poached to go anywhere. The other thing with Quinn, I believe, if I've got my math right, Sark follows up Shanahan, right? So, I mean, that just goes to show, I know Sark didn't work there, but, got back to Alabama, I think, after that. He took the Alabama job after that, I think, and kind of.
Yeah, he left.
But, I mean, it just goes to show he's not afraid to go swinging on offense.
No, he's not, which makes the Chip Kelly rumors, which I think at first I dismissed pretty handily, both of like, this feels like Chip's agent putting a bunch of stuff out and some reporters falling for it. Yep. But then you do a little bit more digging and a few more people report it and you talk to some people and it's like, maybe there's a little substance to this. I think they want to have a conversation. I wouldn't put Chip at the top of the list, but who knows? That's a real possibility of that conversation happening.
Yes, he's had interviews with several clubs about the spot.
Yeah, and he's clearly got interest in getting back to the NFL. And, Logan and I were talking about that this morning. Of course, Chip's now the head coach of Logan's Bruins out there at UCLA. So he watches those games quite a bit. And he said he's seen an adaptation and an evolution of Chip's offense that he thinks would work very well in the NFL. I personally would prefer going from the Shanahan tree directly. I think that's more sustainable over time. There seems to be a never-ending, river of candidates to pull from, which is nice. So the Clint Kubiaks, the Brian Griesies, et cetera. But we'll see. Frank Smith or Darrell Bevell down in Miami. Could you pull one of them? Could you give them play calling duties? Like I think there's a lot of potential, candidates there that could be interesting. But yeah, Dan's not. I will say this: he's willing to take a swing. That's great. I do also think he realizes the biggest mistake he made in Atlanta was not replacing Kyle with Matt LaFleur, because Matt was there and he was ready. And instead, he winds up going to, I guess, Tennessee with Vrabel, I think was his next stop. And then he gets hired in Green Bay. I might be missing a stop for Matt. But that was the other option. And he went with Sark. And Sark, they actually had one good season under Sark, and then it went sideways. And then things with Dirk Cutter went, belly up. Yeah. But I think that developing a staff underneath whoever he hires as OC for the hopeful champagne problems of we're so successful that other teams are poaching us is a priority for him in round 2.
You do have to absolutely love that we were already worried about who was going to steal our guys before we even had our guys. I will say, for the folks that are worried about losing coordinators, that feels like it's one of the advantages to Chip Kelly. Like, I think maybe people realize that he's not, certainly in the NFL, a head coach guy. And so maybe you don't have to worry about him getting plucked off your staff quite as easily. I find that as you brought up Logan. Are they going to pluck Logan from your podcast to help coach the football team?
I actually meant to ask him this morning first off air if I was allowed to ask him on air, and then ask him on air, and I didn't. I want to throw something at Ben Standig for putting that in The Athletic. I'm just like, why are you trying to steal my podcast host? That's not how we compete in the podcast world. You do your own podcast, Standig. I will say this, because I have asked Logan in the past about coaching on and off the air in the NFL. He 1,000%. My opinion is he 1,000% could do it. I think Logan Paulson could be a tight ends coach in the NFL tomorrow. Very easily an assistant tight ends coach, probably a full-fledged position coach. He is that smart about the game. He's in pass game, run game, technique, everything. He knows. I mean, look, there's like 2 guys in the last decade and a half that have Logan's measurables in terms of short arms, slow 40, etc., and had actual NFL careers. He got by because he was willing to put his face in there and be physical, and because he was smarter than hell. So he could do it. He has no desire at this time, or at least the last time I talked to him, which was like last season. He had no desire. The hours are brutal. He's got 2 kids that are fairly young and in sports, and he likes going to Owen's hockey games and his daughter's stuff, and his wife likes having him around, and he enjoys, I think, the OC stuff at the high school. That scratches the itch. Could, as his kids get a little bit older, that change? Or if he's like, I love Dan Quinn, which he does. Dan Quinn is one of the guys that I think could pull him realistically. Yeah. But I do not think Logan wants to coach in the NFL right now. So I'm going to speak for him, and hopefully he listens to me, because I don't want to lose my podcast host either.
Better shot he's coaching or gets a bump up to one of the big networks, because just as good as he is coaching, he's fantastic on TV.
He is. I mean, I do think, though, like, he likes living in Ashburn. Like, his kids are happy.
I mean, he's got a good gig right now.
Look, if Fox calls and is like, hey, dude, we want you to call games on TV and we'll pay you 6 figures to fly around the country, but you get to be home all week. Yeah, I think he'd take that gig in a heartbeat. But I don't know that he necessarily is like going to be sitting on a desk in Bristol every day. I think he's quite happy here, but we'll see.
I don't think people realize exactly the time that those young upstart position coaches have to put in. I think I remember Cooley saying, people had offered him, and it was just like, no way.
Yep.
I see a lot of people in the chat talking about EB. It's funny. I had put a post out 3 or 4 days ago before the court, the position, the coaching trees all got filled up, the hires. And I said, what happens if everybody goes different ways, and we're sitting here looking at ourselves? And I can't even tell you how many times people said, well, they'll just promote EB for a year. And I know was never going to happen. That was never going to happen. That's not even where I'm getting to. I'm trying to figure out what it is with EB. Like, the people love the idea of EB. The fan base loved the idea of EB. His offense scored 1 more point than Scott Turner, who nobody wanted in town anymore. He hasn't, to my knowledge, actually gotten interviews, certainly hasn't gotten head coaching interviews. And yet we can't convince a fan base that was begging for more points last year that it was time to move off from him. I have a hard time understanding the infatuation with EB. Can you explain it to me?
The idea of him is better than the reality last year. And I do think that when you look at how dysfunctional last year was, starting with the offseason where he didn't get to hire his coaches in the way that he probably would have liked, to people thinking the roster is terrible. And in many ways, it's not very good. But I think some people think it is far worse than it actually was. The O-line is the worst in football, when it's realistically more, 15 to 20. It wasn't good, but it wasn't the worst in football. And things like that you go down the list, and like, it just can't be EB's fault. Like, he's got Super Bowl rings. How could you possibly imagine that it was this guy's fault? And it's like, look at the data, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you at that point. His resume is great. I was one of the people who was willing to go there before the season last year and just be like, this feels incredibly unfair that this guy with this resume has to come here to prove himself. This feels like there's a lot of bias happening. And, you even heard when he got here, I had one executive tell me that he's one of the, I sat down and talked football with the guy, and he's one of the smartest football guys I've ever talked to. But the reality is he came here to do a job. It was the most power he's ever had, and he failed. It wasn't a good job. And eventually, when you interview with like 17 teams for the head coaching job and nobody hires you, like, that's got to say something. And I also think that, it's not just players who are like, don't really love the way he worked us or did this or did that. Like, he alienated a lot of coaches in that building. Like, there was a lot of stuff that happened. Mike Jones said that yesterday on my show. I'd heard that as well. Like, he pissed off a lot of people, Doug. And I know some of that probably was EB being right and those people needing to have a better work ethic or a better this or a better that if they really wanted to win, be a little less comfortable. But not all of it. Not all of it was, EB's right, everyone else is wrong. And the inability to get that bridge, I think, was huge. And I think that it's pretty wild that we're looking at a year where he goes from, like, he comes here so that he can take the stepping stone to head coach to, I don't know if this dude's going to have an OC job next year. Like, he might have to take a year. If I were him, I would go on television because he's dynamic. He's has a personality. Right. Like, he talks great. He's so smart. God, that guy's such a great football mind. But how do you apply it as a coach? And how do you teach? And can you work with more than one type of person? He might just be the perfect guy to work with Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, Pat takes that coaching. He's a fellow competitive psycho. Like, his learning style might match up with EB. Like, there's a lot of psychology and learning styles and teaching and philosophy stuff that goes into that. But long story short, like, outside of, if all you do is your resume is like, oh, Adrian Peterson, Patrick Mahomes, eventually you look back and you go, wait a second. Are you the reason those guys were great? Or is it the other way around? And I wonder if the league right now is in a phase with EB where they're like, maybe it was the other way around. I don't know if that's fair, but I think that's kind of where we are. And I think the way he played this last year, a lot of people look at as foolish and reckless and careless. And that's not going to get you another job.
It's not. I know you're on a hard out here, and we've got Robert Henson waiting. Tell me what's next for you as far as, like, actually, let's do this. Tell me about what's going on tonight. I'm excited about it. First time it's ever happened. Give us a little preview of the show tonight.
Yeah, so we have our live event tonight at the Bethesda Theater here in the DC area. There are, I don't even know if there are tickets remaining. I think there might be less than 20 remaining. I think they're sold out. Are they sold out? So yeah. I hope you got yours, but it'll be really fun. It's called 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980 Live. It's all of us on stage together. Jonathan Allen is our special guest, so we'll be talking to him, obviously, about the hire and everything else and what happened last season. And we'll tell, off-air, behind-the-scenes stories around the radio stations and talk about Super Bowl 58, preview that. Like, there's just a bunch of great football talk of your favorite radio show, whether it's on The Fan, whether it's on the Team 980. So that's going to be a lot of fun tonight. I'm doing my show from the theater beforehand, so that'll be fun. Cool. I'm sure some of the guys will pop by our set. I've heard it's a really nice theater. I've never. Yeah, been. I'm excited. I don't get excited to go to Bethesda often, but I'm excited for this. Shout out to Bethesda.
2 seconds. Who's going to win the Super Bowl?
I picked San Francisco before the year. I think I'm going there. I know this is longer than 2 seconds, but God, I feel like a dumbass betting against Mahomes.
He reminds you every time, right? I'm
just like, why did I picked against him the last 2 times? I picked Buffalo, I picked Baltimore, and the second it came out of my mouth, I was like, you moron. And then he made me look bad.
Bad money to bet against Mahomes. Craig, I appreciate you. I would have done this all day with you, but I always appreciate the time, man.
I appreciate you squeezing me in, man. This was great, and we'll do it again soon.
Yep, appreciate you.
You got it.
All right, how about that? From one superstar to another. Robert, what's up, brother?
Not much, man. Appreciate you having me on, Big Doug. How's it been going?
It's going good, man. Going good. You messaged me yesterday and said we got to do a podcast.
Yeah, I went to jump on.
What is going on with you?
Not much, man. Obviously, you probably saw the Twitter interactions I was having yesterday with people hitting the panic button, and it just made me just think and want to know: is it really us? Is it the fan base that makes Washington an unattractive place, or is it the pressure? Like, what is it? Like, I'm not blaming the fans at all. It just made me really want to ask that question and try to figure out what is it right now. Was it Dan alone? Is that changing? Obviously, with a hiring like Peters, I think that stigma's kind of going out the window. But it was crazy Twitter interaction yesterday. So
Well, that's how that stays crazy on Twitter. Uh, yeah, I'll say, for the fan base, it's 20, 30 years, right? So, I mean, it's like we've been beaten down. And every time we think we've got something good coming, Shanahan came. You're talking about a Super Bowl winner. We were pumped. That was going to be it.
yep,
3 years into that thing, they had the succession plan for Kyle already. And then boom, you know how that went. That
yeah,
did not work as we thought it would. Then they brought in Jay. Jay was the upstart coordinator. Everybody was trying to find a coordinator. Gruden's a big name. That lasts about as long as you'd expect that it would. And so I think right now what's happened is you've finally gotten all this out. You've got Peters in, and I think the fan base thought that we were getting ready to get up there and just start slapping home runs, right? And so they slapped that Peters. That Peters is a home run. Now they slapped that one. So we're saying,
it was.
all right, next man up, right? Let's slap another home run. And I think compared to that big bomb that was Adam Peters, Dan Quinn probably comes off like a bunt single, right? Like we got on base. We're still out there playing and running the bases, but we got on there with that bunt. It was not the triple or the single. Damn sure won a home run. I think that's probably what's got people riled up right now.
That makes sense, and I see you with the baseball analogies going off today. But when you look at the Quinn hire, man, is it a 5 on the Richter scale? It's not really a home run like you said, but I think it brings some stability. The biggest thing that came out of this to me was the relationship with the player. So as you know, I don't really listen to all the media talking heads when it comes to coaches, and I want to learn and I want to know what the people inside the building actually believe in and think about when they think of their head coach, or when they want to go run through a brick wall for this guy. Every player that has ever played for him has said yes. So you heard Micah Parsons come out and say, how much he loved the guy, how much he's gonna miss him. When you see impact players like that making statements, I mean, that's not just something you just wake up and say, I'm gonna give this guy some glory today. Like, you really got to earn that. Players trust is one of the biggest things you got to earn in the locker room. So with him coming in, I think he can definitely get a Jonathan Allen back on board, get a Deron Payne back invested, into the process of trying to win. So, all your big name stars, your Terry McLaurins, those guys will get on the same page with him very easily. So it's a good thing to play for a player's coach, but it's also a bad thing too, because I've seen i.e. Jim Zorn get run over plenty of times in meetings and just trying to be a player's coach. The same thing could be said for Jay. I mean, that happened a lot in Washington while he was there. So
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword. Well, so we'll see.
I've been asking around. You're the perfect guy to ask this. Like, what kind of bump do guys like Jamin Davis and Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin, and I mean, how much do they immediately get bumped just by not just the X's and O's of the new scheme, but just the energy that the new guys will bring in the building? It felt like from the outside there was no juice left in the building.
Yeah, it's a huge bump. There's some nervousness that goes into it. After my rookie year, after Zorn was fired, Shanahan came in and it was just this buzz. I mean, he even came in and repainted the building. So he hired new secretaries and new staff in the front office. So like there's this buzz, there's this this energy that's palpable. But just being honest, players look at the scheme more than anything. then you get on the phone with guys who've played with him. Hey, how's this guy? What do you think about this guy? What can I look forward to? And as I was breaking down Dan Quinn's defense yesterday, I was quite impressed with his defensive skills, especially along the D line, moving people around, DBs being extra aggressive, encouraged to be aggressive and attack the ball, putting them in positions to be successful. And a lot of the pre-snap alignments really jumped off the screen to me. I mean, you got Michael Parsons lining up at linebacker, and then all of a sudden he's in the A gap and looping around the edge. Like, that's creativity. That's playing to your player's strength. So that we got a lot to look forward to with those players in mind, the young players in mind, where a new scheme could, make or break their career.
Jamin Davis is not Micah Parsons. I'm not going to say that. So
No,
please don't attack me
no.
in the chat. But is that what he'll be asked to do? There will at least be moving Jamin around a bit more, I would expect, to get more out of him. I mean, where do you see Jamin Davis and some of these other guys fitting into what you saw from the alignments yesterday?
I never thought he was a true Mike linebacker. Let's be honest.
Yeah, he's not.
His play skill, his play style, he's not a true Mike linebacker. Mike linebacker will stick his face in the fan against anything. He's more of a cutback guy, exile linebacker, more of a, I would say, a coverage guy, but he's looked lost in coverage plenty of times over the past few seasons. But I think getting on the same page with him and asking him what he feels comfortable doing is a huge thing. But I could see a player like him lining up all over the field. Another thing that jumped out on Dan Quinn's defense is the linebackers being able to just run freely. So when you look at the film, it looks like the D tackles, the D line, everybody on D line is encouraged to engage immediately as many offensive linemen as they can to let those linebackers run. Kind of remind me of the Ray Lewis Baltimore defense. Just from a scheme standpoint of how they like to let the inside linebackers run, but it's going to free him up to use his athleticism a lot if he buys in, if he puts the work in, and if he kind of changes his mindset to a scheme change. I still think we need a true Mike linebacker.
Oh, for sure. I don't know who plays the position next year. I don't think it's not Barton. I don't think, and we damn sure can't do
hell no.
for another year. So no, they got it. Not a great year to need it in the draft. I haven't looked too much at free agency. I know Patrick Queen's out there. I don't know what your thoughts are. I'm not sure he's a natural Mike either. Maybe you think different.
No, I think that's why they brought Roquan in. Exactly. If I'm being honest, yes. I think he plays well off ball or outside. On the other side of someone
they play like
that's
that
a true Mike.
Right.
So I think he plays better that way, but we don't know because at LSU he was pretty much in between those two positions and played that, but that was such a long time ago. But we don't know. I'm interested in seeing what Baltimore does with Patrick Queen. But as you look around the free agency, it's not really anybody that jumps off the page to you.
It's interesting. I'm curious your thoughts on this. We had Mitch Tischler on the show the other day, and we were talking about position flex and how Ron loved to have these guys he could move around, and I get the concept. But he said that Percy Butler had told him that when he got to Washington, they gave him 4 playbooks to learn. That can't be usual, is it?
No, it's definitely not usual, especially for a young rookie. Like
rookie DB, they gave him 4. They gave him the nickel, the free safety, the strong safety, and then I guess corner. I don't know what the 4th playbook could have been, but they said he gave him 4.
That could be a Ron's guy type of move, where you bring these guys in and you just throw a lot at them. I know the best defenses are the simplest. The players play better when they think less and process what's in front of them and react in split-second decisions. But doing that's ridiculous. Like, you're asking for it. So as a rookie, you come in with your blinders on. You're just trying to learn your job. I would say midway to the latter part of the season, you really start to kind of get your field of vision and see what other players are doing around you and putting it all together. So 4 playbooks at once is ridiculous. If that's true, I can't believe Ron did that.
Yeah, Percy's the one that said it out of his mouth. So I mean, I think, and you could see it, right? I mean, I think that was one of the frustrating things about that defense the last year or so, or how many times right before the snap, where you could see the guys didn't know where he was going to be or where I'm supposed to be. And I think maybe Smoot told me one time that the best defensive coaches he had told him why to be there, not where to be. So that when it was time, he already knew where to be because he knew why to be there. I'm curious from your standpoint, like what is the best way to coach a guy up?
Well, it just depends on the player and how he processes information. For me, it was, especially in coverage, it was like I had Kirk Oliver-Dottie when I was there. He was a great facilitator of the game, knew pretty much everything. So he's a great resource, a great coach to have. And it became all about route concepts. So there was a lot of the why, but there was also route recognition. There was, if this guy goes out, something's coming back in. So it's just how you process information as a player. A lot of guys are they could just look at the playbook and get it. I'm a kinesthetic learner. I had to get out there and do it. Just looking at a playbook all day didn't help me. So I think going over it in the classroom like they do, watching film, and then taking it immediately out to the field and applying it is probably the best way to get a young player like Percy, with so much talent, so much speed, athleticism, to get where he's going and to maximize his career.
Where are you at on Cam Curl? I mean, the fan base is super high on him, right? He's one of our own. We get to this point though where we're like, sometimes it's easy to overvalue our own. Again, we're talking about a guy that was asked to do a whole lot of things. I mean, what kind of bump does Cam Curl get if he's only asked to play strong safety?
I think it's a natural fit for him. I just moving players around too much and doing a lot. To me, that only works with D linemen and the front seven, basically. Anytime you get outside of that, it gets a little iffy and wishy-washy, and you see players not where they're supposed to be, letting guys go. But on Cam Curl, I was one of those people that were high on him. I still think he's got a ton to give. It'd be interesting to see. I'm kind of middle of the road on Cam Curl right now. I think it's a make or break type of situation for him, especially what is he going on year 4 now? So
he's up. They got to give him a contract.
Yeah, so it's a make or break. I don't think he breaks the bank or has the ability to break the bank.
14 million a year.
That's too steep for me.
That's
but again, I value the position differently.
Yeah.
I feel like you can find a good safety in the draft. You drafted a couple of guys who were pretty good, but Cam Curl means a lot to this fan base. He's made some extraordinary plays, but 14 years is a little steep for me.
Number 2 pick looks like it'll be a quarterback. I think you have a favorite. Let's talk about it.
Jaden Daniels. What we come into is the offensive line not being what we want it to be. A guy who can move. Obviously, he's a young player. He made some silly plays. I think I watched one play where he jumped over a lineman and got rocked and fumbled the ball. So all things that obviously can be avoided with better coaching, better structure around him. When you're on college campus, you're that guy. So you feel like you can do whatever you want to on the field, especially being a Heisman Trophy winner. But the proof is there. He's improved every year. I've watched a lot of film on Drake May. I don't see it. And if Herbert is the comp, what has Herbert done? So he's solid. I'm not gonna knock Herbert and say he's not a good quarterback. He's solid, but you got 2 big weapons in Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Palmer coming out of the slot. I don't really see.
The argument that I get for Daniels seems to be the same, and I find it interesting. I'll just throw it out there to see your thoughts. Jaden Daniels played with a whole rack of NFLers, and it's hard to tell whether it was him or the talent.
That's a good thing to me. That's a good thing to me. Now, I know that sounds weird because you want your quarterback, you want your leader to jump off the screen, jump off the page, and be the best guy on the field. But I mean, obviously, he's not running routes. He's not catching the passes. Any quarterback that's put in a situation with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson has favorable weapons. Um, and Curtis Samuel had a great year last year. So you want to utilize those weapons. You want to maximize those weapons. So if he played with a whole bunch of NFLers and those guys don't get drafted or they don't put up stats, then he's not a good quarterback. Now, if those guys, he put those guys in position to make plays and they made plays, neighbors, all those guys, that tells me he's a damn good quarterback. He can facilitate the offense. He can get it done. So with Drake May, obviously there was a drop off in talent around him. Um, he never popped off the screen to me. He's not a quarterback that I fear if I'm a defensive player going into a game.
Is Caleb Williams good enough to make the jump for?
It's too much of a diva for me, but I don't think so. I think
we be one for you.
Daniels is one for me, but again, I'm not an offensive guy. I'm strictly going from a player's basis of who do I not want to play? Like what guy strikes fear into me and I got to constantly think about. The scrambling quarterback is the new wave. It's what's real in the NFL, especially when guys protect themselves, i.e. Lamar, Patrick Mahomes when he has to, and not that Drake May can't do that. It's just, I don't fear that. I don't fear that. When Jay Daniels gets loose, it's probably a home run. Drake May gets loose, it's probably a 12, 15-yard game. I'm okay with that. We're going to tackle him, get back in the huddle. But but it's just I go off that. So I'm not a scout. I'm not looking at the intangibles as far as he's 6'3", he's got the prototypical build, the prototypical arm.
Yeah.
Like none of that means anything to me. It's what you do on film. What can you put on film? Because that tells me who you truly are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's only like 3 or 4 quarterbacks succeeding that are this quote unquote prototypical size, right? They're actually 6'4", 6'5". There aren't actually all that many of them. I'm curious. One of the things that concerns me about Jaden Daniels is when you get these guys that tend to be run first quarterbacks, that at some point they don't want to be run first quarterbacks because it supposedly is a bad look. I think of Lamar Jackson in this most recent AFC Championship game, and it felt like he left 100 rushing yards on the field just because he wanted to be a pocket passer. That frustrates me.
That I put that on coaches. I put that at the feet of the coach. Do what got you to the dance. Do what got you there. Do what made you successful. Don't get in the championship game and switch up. We've seen the same Brock Purdy. We've seen the same McCaffrey. We've seen the same Shanahan offense. And to Dan Campbell's credit, we saw him go for it on fourth down. That's what he's done all season.
Yes.
So if you lose on it, it is what it is. But do what got you to the dance. But I definitely hear where you come from, Doug. It definitely makes sense. We went through that, I think, with RG3 a little bit, where he didn't want to use his athleticism as much. And an injury can play a big factor into that. And if you're to that point as a player where you get injured and you just don't want to play your game anymore, that makes you ineffective. You got to do what gets you there. Not that you can't learn another skill, but you got to do what gets you there. I'll throw a sleeper at you. I actually like Michael Penix a lot. Is he worth number 2? Hell no. No, I wouldn't pick him at 2, but it's intriguing. I like the kid out of Tulane way better than Drake May, if I'm being honest. So there are a lot of players that pop off the page, but when you get that deep into it, you're probably better off keeping Sam Howell if you don't make a move for quarterback at 2.
People would be upset with you, Robert, if we were back with Sam Howell next year. But, in reality, I was talking about this the other day. How close is the roster? Like, I keep hearing people say you got to go quarterback when you're at 2. You can convince me of that. That's fine. I can see why you don't want to be picking a 2 all the time. But seriously, how close is the roster? Because I was looking at it the other day. It don't look very good.
It's not close at all. People who are saying that it's only one word I can use, and they're delusional. We're not close at all. We don't have the front 5 in place to protect the quarterback that we may select. So I'm interested in seeing what Adam Peters does, but I do trust his ability to evaluate talent, get the right people in place, get the right coaches in place um, to maximize the scheme, maximize the players. So I'm interested in seeing what he does at two. I mean, he's got a wealth of draft capital at his fingertips. It's going to be interesting to see. I can't wait for the draft, honestly.
I can't either. It's my favorite time of the year. It'll be interesting to see with Peters too, right? Because he's done it. They've done it. It wasn't his show, but I mean, they spent all the capital to go get Lance. They brought in a Jimmy Garoppolo, and they're now riding with Mr. Irrelevant. So it's been in San Francisco. They have done it multiple different ways. So this idea that they'll obviously take a quarterback at 2, while I get it and it makes sense, I think just this foregone conclusion, maybe not. Maybe they'd rather trade down and build the lines for one more year. Maybe they run it back with EB for one more year at offensive coordinator, build the
I
lines
wouldn't
up,
be mad
trade
at that.
back.
Yeah, I wouldn't be mad at that.
EB gets a lot of love. Explain it to me.
So two things. The first thing that jumps out off the page to me is that there's a lot of dysfunction still in Washington. There was this past year with
I
EB,
think that's fair.
rubbing coaches the wrong way, rubbing players the wrong way. Now, I don't know how much of that is your ass is getting paid. Do what I ask you to do so we can be successful, and I'm going to coach you hard, right? Because we know this is a players' league now, and coaching players hard at that level becomes way more difficult with the amount of money that they're making, right? So it's difficult from that standpoint. And then I don't know how much Ron Rivera was in the way. I'm not scapegoating Ron at all. I just don't know. Like, I don't know if EB was trying to do certain things and Ron was like, no. When it was it truly EB's show? I don't know. They did say it was, but at times it didn't look like it. It didn't feel like it. Some of the decisions made and clock management and things of that nature, it just didn't feel like it offensively. So I'd be interested in seeing that. And then Sam Howell got off to a damn good start, was putting up good numbers, and then there was a huge drop. Like it was so inconsistent that it became laughable at some point. So again,
they refused to run the ball. I mean,
yeah,
you tell me from a defensive player what happens when the offense refuses to run the ball, right?
You become one-dimensional, and it's easy to hone in on. I mean, Washington offense, ranked 25th last year? 19.4 points a game. I mean, and they in the defense, in the defensive meeting room, you're telling your defensive guys, if we can hold them to 21 points or less, we're going to win the game.
That's right.
But you averaging 19.4 a game, you're not going to move the needle. The run game is so vital, the opening up those lanes in the middle of the field. As a linebacker, I'm taking at least 3-4 steps up because that's my first responsibility. So it opens up so much more when you fail to do that or fail to identify a lead running back, for that matter, outside of a goal line situation. It becomes easy to defend.
I've heard people suggest that John Allen could move to D end, that they've got these two defensive tackles, and it's not the way you build a defense. It's not the way you spend on defense. Better to just move one of them, or do you think that one of them can make the transition to end? Or are we living in a world where you can get by with the pressure from up the middle and both of them can play tackle at the same time, and they just weren't doing it right in the scheme last year?
I personally feel like they weren't doing it right from watching the games. And then it looked like something happened this season where the lights went off for Jonathan Allen and he didn't look like himself.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was age, attrition, just mentally checked out or what, but he didn't look like himself. But when you got those two guys in the middle as a linebacker, I want those two guys in the middle. Keep them off the edge. I want to run free. Right. So with Dan Quinn's scheme, I think you'll see an improvement in the rush defense. You'll see improvement in games and getting those guys and moving them to end on certain plays, keeping them in the middle, lining them head up on the center. whatever the case may be. So that's one thing that Dan Quinn did excel uh, uh, in Dallas. So I'd be interested to see it. You got it, but you got to keep those guys. Those are your leaders. You got to keep those guys in the middle. Payne is a problem. Allen is a problem. If anything, I'm putting more pressure on the outside guys to actually rush and get upfield and get to the quarterback.
Who are the rush guys, Robert?
I think you heard what Adam Peters said. I think that's a position that they attack in free agency. I mean, you got Brian Burns. We don't know what the Panthers are doing with him. Jacksonville said they're going to keep Josh Allen, but you don't know. So it'd be interesting to see. I think we are heavy for a pass rusher. We really go for a pass rusher in free agency.
Yeah, people have been saying a lot about how they need those in tackles, and I think you're right. They've got to try to find. I'm worried that Brian Burns will stay in Carolina. I'm worried that Josh Allen will stay down in Jacksonville. Not a great year to need one in the draft. That I don't. Those edge rushers aren't the same as they've been in years past. It'll be interesting to see. They need tackle. That seems to be a good spot in the draft. Had you ever considered coaching when you retired?
Yes, but the hours, not interested. I believe in having some free time and family time. It just did not make sense to me to do that, especially early on. Wanted to go back to TCU and coach. Those grad assistants are there from sun up to sundown. Sometimes they don't leave. They use blow up beds in the film room, and to me, that's a young single man's life. I'm not interested.
Yeah, no, it's when Chris Baker was on all the time on the podcast, he said the same thing. He had wanted to coach, but the hours are crazy. I had just talked to Craig Hoffman about, who does the podcast with Logan Paulson. I think Ben Standig had said maybe because of his relationship to Dan Quinn, but all the guys say the same thing. If you only knew how much time you were in the building doing the coaching, it's crazy. Robert, I got to run, but look, we're doing these every Wednesday for the draft. So as we get closer to the draft, let's do it again. We'll get some thoughts on some of these prospects from you.
Sounds good, man. I appreciate you having me on, Doug.
All right, brother. Appreciate
Always
you.
a good time. All right, man.